It's Lisa from Been There, Got Out, and today is a long awaited interview. So I have attorney Evynne Fair. She has a background as a child protective services worker. She's a former sheriff. She's now an attorney in, I think, Colorado. And we did an interview together, but it was on YouTube, and I posted a clip this morning. But now we're going to be talking about how people weaponize false allegations. I just want to make sure she can get on because she hasn't been on Instagram Live before. I think now she does criminal defense and personal injury, but she has such a rich experience from the past about what she's seen and the crazy allegations that people used against each other, especially during, there you are. I see you, Evynne. Especially during difficult on. All right, but I've really been looking forward to this one. The other interview we did was about how to handle when you get involved with child protective services. Why don't I see you, Evynne? Can you see me?
I can see you. Can you not see me?
I can't see you, but it's okay. This happens sometimes. As long as other people can see both of us, that's okay.
Hopefully they can.
Yeah. I don't know why it happens sometimes, but anyway, it's all about what we talk about, not if I can see you.
Sure.
So first of all, Evynne, before I have you officially introduce yourself, can you just tell us how common are false allegations in the world of family court, even though we know that you don't do family court?
Sure. I think, from my background when I was doing child protective services, and then also when I did some family law practice as an attorney, I wish I had a percentage to give you. I can't go back, unfortunately, and look at all my stats, but I would say it is more common than one would think. I think when I joined Child Protective Services, and I probably talked about this in our last interview, but I'll just briefly touch on it here just for anyone that's new joining in. When I got into Child Protective Services, I assumed that if a child is safe or unsafe, if someone's reporting that a child is unsafe, it's because that child is unsafe. And I kind of had this very rose-colored glasses approach to, if someone's reporting this child as unsafe, that must mean they're unsafe. As I got further into my career, I realized that there are people who either themselves report against the other parent in a divorce proceeding, or they have family members who call and report against that other parent. And oftentimes it can be exactly what you've said. It's just vindictive reporting.
Yeah. And so in our world, with our clients who are all dealing with high conflict divorce or custody battles or even post judgment, it is super common where people are constantly involving child protective services and making these false allegations. So before we go on, Evynne, can you now formally introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. My name's Evynne Fair, and I am currently an attorney in Englewood, Colorado. Before becoming an attorney, and right now I practice personal injury law, but before becoming an attorney, I worked both as a part-time reserve deputy sheriff in Carson City, Nevada for 8 years, and I also was a caseworker with Washoe County Child Protective Services in Reno, Nevada. And that's where I investigated allegations of abuse and neglect for about 2 years for the county. And then when I first started my practice, before doing just personal injury, I also worked doing some juvenile law cases as well as family law cases. And just due to personal reasons, I have switched my practice primarily to personal injury. But most of what I'm talking about is due to my prior work experience. And I also was a law clerk for Denver Juvenile Court.
Yeah.
So I saw the legal proceedings when something gets into the court system for dependency and neglect, which is what we call in Colorado, basically allegations of abuse or neglect is called dependency and neglect court here.
Okay. So one of the comments that you made to me off camera that I was like, we need to talk about this, is you said that now is one of the most dangerous times for fathers as well as stepfathers in terms of being falsely accused. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I think, and both you and I, Lisa, we're women, and so we can absolutely empathize with the Me Too movement. I believe I won't speak for you,
Yeah.
but I'll speak for myself. I understand why the Me Too movement came about. But what I have seen is there has been a lot of situations where the Me Too movement has been weaponized against male fathers and male stepfathers. And I've even, when I was doing criminal defense work, I even had a grandfather accused of sexual abuse against his granddaughters because there was a high conflict custody battle between the grandfather's daughter or the grandfather's daughter and her husband, who was the father of these children. And so the father of the children then made these allegations against the stepfather. And so, in my opinion, we are in a culture right now because of the Me Too movement where there are a lot of false allegations, I think, being made against male relatives or just males involved in family situations because of that. I think women and some of the women in these relationships are using that culture to weaponize allegations against their husbands in these divorce proceedings.
Yeah, it's shocking. And I hate that there's this whole gender wars with domestic violence that where people think that only women tell the truth because that's not true. And we see it all the time with court proceedings where everybody lies about things to get their way.
Absolutely. And there's just the stakes are so high in these custody battles. As you know, Lisa, these are people's children and this is their time with their children, which I think if you were to ask parents whether they would have their child take whether if they had to choose between having their child taken away or going to jail, they would prefer to go to jail,
Oh,
I think.
definitely.
And
Hmm.
so that just shows how high the stakes are, I think, in these divorce proceedings. And that is where I think the motivation is to use whatever tools they think they can use to get a win on their
Hmm.
side. And it's sad because the only people who lose in this situation are the children.
Right, right. Have you ever heard of something called the silver bullet strategy?
You know, I've heard that term, but it's been a while, so remind me what it means.
Okay, so I just heard this through some documentary and I was like, what? And it's that some lawyers are telling their predominantly female clients that when they are at the beginning stages of a divorce, that they should get a restraining order against their ex-husband or their husband because that'll help them in a custody battle. So whether or not anything's happened, to get a restraining order, and it's called the silver bullet strategy.
That now I remember hearing about this when I was doing some continuing legal education when I was doing family law, and now I remember it. And you know, none of the attorneys I ever worked with, I've never heard them, you know, recommending that in those circles, but it's definitely, I think, being recommended by some family law attorneys to, and you're right, it's always to the female client. uh I think, you know, there's biases and stereotypes that they assume that if the female's going in asking for a restraining order, then, you know, they're more likely to get it than if a male were to go in and ask for a restraining order against a female. So, yeah, it's kind of sickening to me to
Yeah.
think that that's how attorneys are strategizing these custody battles or divorce proceedings because I it just makes something so much messier than it really needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about the conflict, like the fueling of the flames of conflict that ends up, like you said, harming the children.
Mm-hmm. And I think my opinion is attorneys when we are getting involved in divorce proceedings or custody battles. I mean, listen to that term I use. I mean, that's such a common term, custody battle.
Hmm.
That's what everyone talks about, and I even catch myself saying it. Is the emotions are so high on each side of the proceeding that I feel like attorneys, regardless of which side they are on, should be coming in as more of the outside person that whose emotions are not high, who can bring some rationale to the thinking of these two folks, you know, that are you know, overcome by their emotions. But what I had seen when I did family law, and it's one of the reasons why I got out of family law, is I was going up against attorneys who were taking on the persona and the emotions of their clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you have a clone, so to speak, of the emotions with a law degree going against the other side. And I think that's just so dangerous. And me trying to go in as the attorney who had a more, like, let's calm things down a little bit, let's bring rational thinking back into the picture. It was very difficult to go up against attorneys that did not have that same approach to their representation. And I did not ever see what the point was of doing it that way. But I guess I went into family law. It wasn't a win or a lose. I was trying to pick up on what was the best for the whole family.
Yeah.
You know, and yes, I was not the guardian ad litem. I was not looking out for the best interests of the children. But I tried to use my background with my clients to just, let them reflect and think, like, is this really the best way to go about this?
Yeah, yeah. There's a term called negative advocates and positive advocates. And negative advocates are people who are, again, adding fuel to the fire. And sometimes it can be lawyers, it could be your own family members where they're like, you should have this righteous indignation, but they're getting you all spun up. The lawyer's getting you all spun up. And that not only costs a lot of money, but like we said, it harms the kids who are stuck in the middle of the conflict. And a positive advocate is somebody who tries to do what you described, like kind of slow things down and focus on resolution and what's best for the kids. But unfortunately, there seems to be a lack of civility in general, but especially in the courtroom where we're up against people where it's just so adversarial.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. That is a trend that we are seeing across all legal fields, is a lack of civility in our profession. And I think we owe it to our clients to bring that back, regardless of what type of case it is, but especially when it's a case where you've got children who are like being pulled back and forth, between their parents.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So let's talk about what to do. Like when somebody gets falsely accused of something awful, which we see all the time with both our male and female clients, we've had them both accused of the worst kinds of abuse. What are some unrealistic assumptions that people have or that they make in the beginning? So say I'm accused of this terrible thing that I didn't do. What do I do wrong? What do you see people do wrong?
I think the first thing that I would see is fear takes over.
Mm-hmm.
So fear and panic set in. And I think especially and I've talked to men about this, and they, and my clients and just different, men in different situations, and their biggest fear is that no one is going to believe them. And
Mm-hmm.
because they were this other person who's making these vindictive false allegations was the first to the punch, so to speak, that they're automatically starting ahead. And to be honest, I wouldn't say that they're wrong. It is innocent till proven guilty in this country. Different people, there's preponderance of the evidence. I mean, I won't get into a whole legal diatribe on different burdens of proof, but the reality is we do have to defend against this. It's not like you can just sit back and let truth win out. So I think that plays into fear and panic. So I guess that's kind of and once fear and panic is driving the bus, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
there's not a lot of rational thinking going on. There can be things that they do that hurt that truth seeking, you know, process. So if fear and panic kick in and they react immediately based on that fear and panic, a lot of times they can do things that aren't going to look so
Okay, tell
good.
us about that. Like, what do you see people do that don't look so good? Because I know there's, this confirmation bias where they think, oh, my ex told everybody that I did this, and now they're only going to believe that story.
Yep. So I've seen where people the ones being accused, start texting, calling, uh, both the accuser. I mean, that's the most dangerous one. If you start getting into an argument with the accuser, you know, things can get said in the heat of the moment that's not going to
Mm-hmm.
be helpful into having the truth come out later. Or, like you said, they also have this confirmation bias where they think everyone now
Yeah.
knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
accusation. So then they start calling and telling everyone else what's been going on and trying to change the narrative immediately. And some of those people hadn't heard anything. And so now there's this drama that has been created by doing that. And so I think that's probably the most dangerous thing I have seen is just, you know, maybe even making threats against the accuser out of
Hmm.
anger, because fear often is tied very closely to anger. And so
Hmm.
just as anger, because when you haven't done something and someone accuses you, I can only imagine the anger that might come out at how dare you accuse me of doing this.
Yeah. You
So
think of like an animal, like an animal that's attacked.
a cornered, yeah,
Yeah.
a cornered animal, right? And you just attack back, and I think that's instinctual. I think that's very hard to fight. And so I guess to help with that, I would really know who you have in your corner, who you can truly trust.
Hmm.
Have, and maybe someone who, how you were talking earlier about people feed into the negative, the negative advocates, the ones that just feed into it.
Hmm.
Find that person or persons in your life, whether it's someone that's just a friend or a therapist or, somebody that's a professional who's not going to feed into the anger, the fear, and the panic, but who's going to listen to you, let you process through all of those feelings, right? Process through the feelings with that person. And then hopefully they can help give you kind of, hey, let's talk about what we can do to try to combat this in a helpful way, not a unhelpful way.
Yeah. I think one of the things that happens too is people are shocked that they're accused of this. They start wanting to tell everybody what the truth is, and then it ends up harming them because there's all this attention being brought to something. And like you said, sometimes other people, they're not even aware of it. And then it
Right.
becomes something like this drama for people to gossip about.
And then it's a game of telephone. So
Right.
now you've told someone, and then when they tell the next person, it's going to be there's going to be a variation on what story they've now told. And yeah, it's just, it turns from a small little fire into a wildfire. I think
Right.
that happens. And I just saw a comment on here too about somebody talking about how mandated reporters often can feed into false reporting. And I just wanted to comment on that that's a great point, because people who are going to make false allegations are sometimes going to make those false allegations through mandated reporters, meaning they know
Hmm.
that mandated reporter is going to have to report those allegations. So I just wanted to comment on somebody that had brought that up. So
Yeah. And speaking of recordings, there's so much stuff with AI. Like, what do you think about people submitting recordings as evidence of things now when so many things can be
and
doctored?
that is something that I know as an attorney, like I'm having to really learn a lot about as AI. And I'll tell you right now, I would consider myself quite ignorant as to how AI is able to be used. But yeah, 10 years ago, or even, gosh, even 5 years ago or 2 years ago, I don't think we would have had to really worry about that.
Mhm.
But now, I mean, you've got AI that, like you said, it can take someone's voice and say other things with that same voice. And yeah, I think, and that's where it really is frustrating to me, is how you're going to combat that is you're going to have to hire experts,
Mhm.
forensic experts who are, you know, well versed in these fields to debunk some of these AI or false, these doctored recordings or whatnot that people are submitting. And not
Yeah.
everyone has that kind of money. And most people don't have that kind of
Right.
money. Let's just be honest. The majority of people who find themselves in these situations do not have those resources to
No,
figure
for
that out.
sure.
And yeah, I think that's just another thing we're going to have to start being worried about.
Yeah. So one of the things you also mentioned was how sometimes forensic reports can be done very poorly. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So, and I'm just to clarify it, when you're talking about forensic reports, are we talking about in like the divorce proceedings, or like a
I'm talking about like investigations with stuff with the kids. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I now
Yeah.
remember what we were talking about when we chatted. Yeah, so I have, unfortunately, so when I was in Child Protective Services, I took trainings on how to do forensic interviews on minors. And so I have that background. And when I got into criminal defense, and I had, clients who were being falsely accused of sexual abuse, and I would go and watch these forensic interviews. I mean, I was horrified at the lack of training that these police officers had, and they were using leading questions. They were, um, yeah, there's a very systematic way that you need to set up a forensic interview with a child, and there's different ways that you need to test their recall and their memory and different things. And so I'll just give you an example of what I'm talking about. I watched a forensic interview of a child who came in, and the forensic interviewer did do some things right. They did the setup right, but then they didn't seem to compare how things didn't make sense. So this girl was 13 years old, coming in for allegations that occurred supposedly when she was 5 years old. So we're talking, 7 years, 8 years, in between the allegations and when she's being interviewed. So the interviewer starts asking her these questions about, what did you do when you woke up this morning? Tell me everything you did from the moment you woke up until you came into my office. And she was just so vague. She couldn't remember what she had for breakfast that morning. She just couldn't remember very simple things from what happened that morning to when she came in for the forensic interview. Then they get into the meat of the allegations, and all of a sudden she could remember what pajamas she was wearing at 5 years old when she thought grandpa, when she was saying that grandpa was molesting her, as she remembered just very vivid details from 7 years ago, but in the beginning of the interview couldn't remember anything from that morning. And to me, that is evidence of a coached interview. That is that poor girl was coached by whoever the accuser is, probably, in this case, of what to say and the different key words. And she was just using words that a 13-year-old isn't going to typically use. And this forensic investigator just didn't pick up on any of that.
Yeah, I recently learned the term for that, like using words that somebody else uses, not a child of that age. It's called borrowed scenarios.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And that's exactly, this forensic interview was just chock full of those red flags. And now I will say I have the benefit of watching the recording of it, right? I'm not in there live. It is much harder when you're in there live with the child. But what I can tell you is, instead of, and I don't know that they didn't do this, but if I had gone back and I was an investigator and I had reviewed that video, I would have picked up on those red flags when I went back and rewatched it. And that would then stop me from moving forward with charges. But instead, they went forward with charges later that day.
Wow.
So that's whole, they didn't review anything or, really dig into that. They basically just went off of what they were perceiving live. And as someone who went back and watched.
Uh-oh, Evan, we just lost your volume. And of course, I can't see you, so I don't know if you got a call.
Am I back?
Yeah,
now?
you're back. You're back.
That was my time limit for my Instagram. I had maxed out my time limit for the day on Instagram. I apologize. So anyways, I went back, and that investigator clearly did not go back and review that interview for those red flags before moving forward with charges. And that's the kind of stuff that I saw over and over again with my clients that were victims of false reporting.
So is it common for somebody else to review, like where there's an interview that's done, it's recorded, like who are the people who generally might review the recordings later?
There should be people actually watching the interview live.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The best practice that I was taught is that you have the interviewer in with the child, but you have either other detectives or caseworkers or both of them watching it live from another room, watching the feed of the recording. And so that way, because when you're in there trying to have a conversation with a child, you're not wanting to take notes or, you're trying to be engaging. And so these other people are supposed to be, watching alongside and picking up on those red flags or whatnot. And so I don't know if that didn't happen in this case, or at the very least, if you don't have the luxury of having someone watching it while you're doing the interview, you should be going and reviewing the interview yourself before making any decisions moving forward. And that, again, that was how I was taught. I don't know where these folks are getting their training, but there's no way if I had been investigating that case that I would have moved forward with charges right away if I had really watched that interview closely.
Yeah. So now on the flip side, it just seems like, or maybe with training, better, but how do you know when someone's telling the truth versus being coached?
Sure.
Because this is a really big
Yeah,
deal.
because it is. And we don't want to just assume everyone's not telling the
Right.
truth, right? And
Yeah.
it goes back to the borrowed scenario. So what kind of words are they using to describe the incident? And again, does their memory of what happened that has no bearing on the case? So just what did you do when you woke up? What did you eat? What did you see? All these things, that's testing that child's ability to recall events that have happened in the past. And so based on what you find out kind of in those test scenarios, you then can really tell, is this what they're telling us is happening? Does that seem to match their memory recall from, something that doesn't have as much importance,
Mm-hmm.
in their life, like getting up? And that just tests their memory. And so it's just, what types of words do they use? How do they describe it? The other thing is body language is huge too. And so in my case, where I could tell she'd been coached, she was just very happy-go-lucky through everything.
Mm-hmm.
Happy-go-lucky, just kind of, and again, not every kid is going to be sad and inward and depressed, but
Mm-hmm.
there's just some really outward signs that you can look for that just don't seem to match up to what is happening. And it's kind of common sense. And it's normal to not remember every detail of somebody's abuse,
Mm-hmm.
but there's going to always be key things, I think, that stick out for somebody's memory. And then, there's children that also repress things too. So I guess the bottom line is forensic interviews are really tough, both to tell when they're telling the truth and when they're not telling the truth, but there's definitely really big red flags to look for. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the things that I'm seeing that are being ignored in some of these cases.
Yeah, somebody had made a comment about when someone has PTSD that a lot of times they do get murky with their details. Do you think that happens with kids too?
I think it does too. And I think that's, in that situation, the example I gave, that was part of one of the red flags, was she was just so detailed
Mm-hmm.
about all these things that happened. And it could be that she wasn't even traumatized by what happened to her, but to me, that was just like somebody had rehearsed that with her fresh in her mind
Mm-hmm.
before going into this interview, versus someone who's been traumatized. I mean, our brain is really good at protecting ourselves from traumatic
Yeah.
events. And so we have these, moments in time that are missing. And so that's totally normal. And that's something to actually look for as supporting somebody's allegation versus, I can't remember what I ate this morning, but I can remember everything that happened to me to the minute detail 7 years ago. That just doesn't add up. And again, when I say these things, I don't mean to say that we automatically shouldn't believe this girl,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely take other steps before we move forward in filing criminal charges against somebody.
Yeah.
I think it's a cue to do some further investigation. Maybe do another interview later, down the road. There's just different things. I think forensic interviews are used as kind of the silver bullet, so to speak. The one thing that's going to just, yep, this person did it. And I don't think they're that they shouldn't be taken as that black and white, I guess.
Yeah. So now I'm thinking about with CPS overall, a lot of times we'll have clients who say that CPS is investigating something with their ex and it comes back unfounded and they get really, really frustrated because they'll say, but all the evidence is there. Like, why do you think so many things come back unfounded? Because of false allegations or other
Yeah,
reasons?
and I think that's the flip side of this whole narrative, right? Is that you get this vindictive reporting that comes in, and then you get these legitimate reports that get made, and they're unsubstantiated, and now parents feel completely helpless into what to do next. And I think there's a combination of things happening. I think there's yes, I do think there's some vindictive reporting. There's always a red flag if this report is made during divorce proceedings, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think they proceed with caution when they know that's happening. Um, and there's one of the things I always ran into is it depends on what the allegation is, but there are certain allegations that they definitely rise to our standards of care as being not neglectful, let's say, or abusive, but they might not always rise to that level from a legal perspective. In
Mm-hmm.
and the best example I can give is I've got reports all the time of, oh, these children don't have beds and they're sleeping on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, from a legal perspective, when I was doing child protective services, having a roof over their head and going to, food, hygiene, a bed wasn't actually a requirement. And so it didn't rise to the level of neglect. It might rise to the level of not how you and I would raise our children,
Right.
but and that's I think part of it too is there's a disconnect between what we expect our children to be raised when we're in when they're in someone else's home versus what is actually legally abuse and neglect.
Yeah. What do you do? I got this question early and I was like, I want to make sure I remember to ask you. What happens when somebody, let's say my ex, is repeatedly making false reports to CPS to just, let's say post-divorce, they just keep doing it. Like, do I have any recourse? Is there any punishment for people that just keep making false reports?
It depends on the jurisdiction, of
Mhm.
course. Some states might have different protections than other states, so I can't really speak to that. But that's the frustrating part is there's not a lot of recourse, and I think that's how these folks can do this with impunity is that they know that it's going to be very hard to then come back for this all to come back on them. And one of the things is the report in at least in Colorado and Nevada. So Colorado is where I'm a practicing attorney. Nevada is where I was in child protective services. In those states, and I believe it's most states, the identity of the reporting party can never be it's confidential. It can't
Mhm.
be released to the person who's being investigated. And so that's also the part of the frustration is there's conjecture there's we're assuming who is making this, and oftentimes by the way the allegations are written we know exactly who it is,
Mhm.
but us as the victims of these false allegations would never have access to who the reporting party is to then build a case against them, either civilly or criminally, or even trying to get a protection order. And it's just difficult because the minute we start issuing protection orders saying someone can't report abuse and then something really bad does happen, and it's the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And what you said earlier about a red flag, like when something like this is being reported during a divorce, but then there's that catch 22 where people are afraid to report it beforehand. They don't say anything, just like domestic violence.
yeah.
So they wait till the divorce when they can get away, and then it looks like, oh, you're just reporting it now because you're in the middle of a divorce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, that it's just it's this sticky mess that people find themselves in because you're absolutely right. It's, being if they're in the middle of a divorce, that's going to be a red flag to the investigator that this could be vindictive reporting. And I guess, and this is not a very reassuring thing, but it's the luck of the draw as to the caseworker you get too.
Mm-hmm.
Have caseworkers who I think are going to really do a very thorough job, regardless of what this what the context seems to be. And then you're going to have caseworkers who do a terrible job. And that can go both ways. That can be where they substantiate something that shouldn't be substantiated, and that could be where they don't substantiate something that should be substantiated. And it's just a sad and frustrating system. I think that
Yeah. I'm thinking about another catch-22 is with access time. So when somebody suspects that their ex is doing terrible things to their child, they have to still follow court orders with access time, and they still have to exchange the child. But then later it can be used against them, because the opposing counsel can say, well, if you were really worried about the child's safety, then why did you send them over to the other parent? But if you don't send them over to the other parent, you can be held in contempt for refusing to follow an access order.
Yep. And, I think that's where, and again, every state's going to be different. I know in Colorado, there can be emergency motions that can be filed when there is some suspicion, if you're in the middle of a proceeding and there's suspicion that the child's going to be unsafe, when you have to turn the child over to the other parent, using those systems. And so I don't know in New York where you are, but we have pretty decent pro se self-help centers in Colorado. And so, if you don't have an attorney, being able to access that and filing those emergency motions. And then you've got the other thing too, is people will call the police in these situations. And because it's a civil matter, all the police can do is enforce whatever, current court order there is. And there are some departments that won't even get involved in that because it's a civil order and it's not a criminal order or a protection order. So
yeah, we see that too.
Yeah, it's
so let's say at the very beginning, somebody accuses me of something awful. Are there any tips you can give me for what I should do right from the very beginning? Like, CPS is called, they come to my house, they tell me I've been accused of something horrible. Like, what should I do properly from the get-go?
So the first thing is try to stay as calm as you can be. Cooperate with Child Protective Services. As frustrating as it can be, cooperate with them. If you have an attorney that's involved in your divorce proceedings or custody battles, obviously reach out to them and let them know what's going on. I know when I did criminal defense work, I sometimes would just be present when the Child Protective Services would show up to do their home visit and whatnot. And, just when you don't have anything to hide, just tell the truth and let them do what they need to do their investigation, as scary as it can be, because when there's hide, there's no need to, fight them. As frustrating as it is, because they're just doing their job. They had they have to investigate that report based on the allegations. So just cooperate with them and let them do what they need to do. And, if you're worried that they're going to use your words against you, or you don't trust the worker, try to have a third person present when you meet with them, if that's allowed in your state. So
yeah, great.
Yeah, I just stay calm. It's so easy to let that fear and panic and anger, take over. And a lot of times they'll lash out at the worker because they're the ones obviously they're the news bringer of what's going on. And so just be calm, work with them, try to be as cooperative as you can with them, and just try to have faith that the truth of the matter is going to come out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Evynne, for all of this again. Can you tell people how to find you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa, for having me. I always enjoy doing these with you. So yes, again, my name is Evynne Fair. I am an attorney at Oakmont Law Group in Englewood, Colorado. My office number is 720-645-1123. And I'm always happy to jump on a call with anyone who wants to chat.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Lisa.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.